All right, welcome to Module 8, Lesson 1. Today we're going to talk about three different kinds of statistical studies: a sample survey, an observational study, or an experiment. So in this lesson, you are going to learn that there are three main ways in which we can gather data in order to study the statistics. The first way is by doing a survey. The second way is by doing an observational study, and the third way is by working on an experiment. And in this lesson, we will go over these three different types of statistical studies and explain when is the best time to use each of them. All three of these methods are considered statistical studies. We're going to take a look at what that means based on the definition of a statistical study. So, a statistical study is a study where data is collected and the statistics are examined. So remember, we talked about in the previous section, statistics are any numbers that come from a sample. So we're going to be taking a sample, finding the mean or the proportion, and taking a look at what those means or proportions from the sample tell us about the population. So the first one we're going to take a look at is a sample survey. So we're going to look at surveys, observational studies, and experiments. Why do we use samples to help us gather information? The goal is to answer some of the questions that were given below. At the end of this section, you'll be able to determine if a survey, an observational study, or an experiment is the best way to answer the questions at the bottom. So do students learn better when they're listening to music or in silence? Do SAT scores really go up if students attend a 6-week SAT seminar? Do students learn better when they're sitting in rows or in a horseshoe pattern? Or do students learn better if school starts at 7:30 a.m. or 9 a.m.? Finally, would students in elementary schools learn better if they had a chance to have a morning snack? Can you think of any questions that you potentially have had and thought about that you would like the answer to? And think about that, and then as you're going through this lesson, think about how you can answer your question with a survey, observational study, or an experiment. Now that we've learned what a good sample is in the last section, let's see where we're going to use those good samples. Now just remember, our samples need to be a mini population. So what exactly is a sample survey? A sample survey is a questionnaire that's given to a few members of the population. So if we just want to answer the question, how many hours a night do you sleep? We could potentially just find a sample that represents our mini population that we've defined, hand out a survey to those members of the sample that we have selected, and then after we do that, we can answer our question with a statistic. A few things that you want to be aware of when you're doing a survey is if you're trying to get a valid answer to a question, make sure that you're watching the wording of the question. So if you're trying to determine whether or not people like the beach and you state, do you like the beach? People are most likely going to say yes because of that word, do you like the beach? You're leaning them towards liking the beach. You don't want to lean anyone in any direction. You want the question to be completely neutral so that they give their own opinion. You also want to be careful about the person doing the interview. So if you're trying to figure out whether or not your friends are speeding and a police officer is giving out the survey, then most people are probably going to lie because they don't want to get in trouble with the law. So they're going to say that they don't speed when in fact they might actually speed. So be careful with the person doing the interview. And finally, you want to think about where you're doing the survey. If you're doing a survey on if people prefer a book or a movie and you stand outside the library, you're going to get more people that say they like to read since they are at the library. So this is not going to be a true reading. This is going to overestimate the people that prefer a book over a movie because you're not getting a neutral sample where somebody could do a book or a movie. So a better thing to do would potentially stand outside a coffee shop because people can get coffee before or after they read a book or before or after they go to a movie. So that would be a great spot to answer that question. So let's take a look at first the wording of a question. So the way in which a question in a survey is worded is very important. You want the answers to be accurate, so that means you need to word the question so it doesn't guide the person being interviewed one way or the other. You want to get their true answer. You don't want their answer to be leading in the direction that you, as the interviewer, would want them to. We are trying to get a true sense of what the population thinks. So let's take a look at the two examples below. Which one is worded so that that the interviewer will get an accurate answer. So in the first one, it says on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being not stressful and 5 being stressful, how stressed do you get by homework? Okay, now let's take a look at this. Notice how we have that word how stressed. How do you think that is going to lead the person answering the question to answer this question? Are they going to be leaning towards stressful or not stressful? This is not necessarily a good question because you are leading that person to say that they are stressed because you're saying, how stressed do you get by homework? So a better way of saying this would say on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the most stressful and 1 being not stressful and 5 being highly stressful, rate yourself for your stress level for your homework. So you're not saying that they are getting stressed. Now here, note, we could use this average stress level and this information to see if the school needs to do something in order to decrease stress levels. Let's take a look at the second one. Based on research done by an independent company, they estimated that 6% of trash in today's landfills comes from plastic water bottles. Given this information, what's your opinion on placing a ban on plastic water bottles in the United States? So read this question. Is it leaning you in one direction or the other, or is it pretty neutral? Well, this is actually a good question because it gives you a fact. 6% of the trash. It's done by an independent researcher, so it's not done by maybe an environmental group or a trash company trying to benefit themselves. Then it just states to give your opinion. It said, do you think water bottles should be banned? Or indicated that the percentage was too high, then that would be a poorly worded question. Okay, so it does not say, do you think water bottles should be banned? And it doesn't indicate that the percentage was too high. So it's an independent company and just says, what is your opinion? The next thing we're going to take a look at is an observational study. So this is different from a survey because it's a method of collecting information about a population by observing a subject without imposing a treatment. So basically what an observational study is it's something that's already happened. If we want to take a look at the health effects of smoking, people have already chosen to make the decision whether or not to smoke. I would just be observing what happens to their health after they have smoked. So when would we use an observational study? That would be when we would want to ask questions to gather information. So an example would be to ask your friends how many hours of sleep. You can then find the average number of hours your friends sleep to determine if high school students are getting enough sleep. So you're not imposing a treatment. You're not telling them to sleep this amount of time or this amount of time. They've already slept that amount of time, and then you're seeing whether or not the sleep is affecting their work. Okay. The second thing we can do is observe a behavior and record what's happening. So let's say that you want to study traffic patterns. You sit at a traffic intersection and see how many cars run a red light for a week. You find the average number of cars that run a red light given a particular day. So this is, you're not making the cars run the red light, you're just sitting there. They're either running the red light or they're not, and you're recording what's happening. And the final thing that we would use it for is when we can't give a treatment to someone. So for example, if we want to examine the effects of smoking, we're not going to force people to smoke. They've already smoked or not smoked, and then we're going to take a look at their health. Or if we want to check and see how pesticides and food affect your health, we can't force people to eat pesticides. We can just see what type of pesticides they've consumed in the past and what their health looks like right now. All right, so let's take a look at this study and explain how this is an observational study. So after doing a very large study of coffee drinkers, the Arizona Daily Star wrote an article titled Coffee Buzz. Study finds Java drinkers live longer. In this study, they examined 400,000 people and the amount of coffee they drank per day. They took into consideration the amount that people smoked, drank, alcohol, and exercise. The study found that coffee drinkers live a little longer than non-coffee drinkers, regardless of whether they drink decaf or regular. So think about this for a minute and think about how this is an observational study. Well, it's an observational study because they asked people how many cups of coffee they drank each day. They didn't force people to drink coffee. So they looked at how much coffee they drank and they said, did you live longer or not live longer based on your coffee? So the next type of statistical study that we're going to look at is an experiment. So before we dig into experiments, let's take a look at some of the vocabulary. So the difference between an observational study and experiment is with an experiment, we actually apply a treatment to a group and record the effects. So here we'd be forcing somebody to sleep for 6 hours or 8 hours. It's just not what they've already done in the past. A placebo is a fake treatment. So when you do an experiment, you always want to have two treatments, the actual treatment and a fake treatment. So the placebo looks like a treatment, smells like a treatment. So people in the experiment think that they're actually getting the treatment. So the people in the experiment don't know if they're getting the placebo or the treatment you're imposing. So the group in the experiment that actually receives the treatment is called the treatment group. The group that's going to get the placebo is called the control group. When you're doing an experiment, you always want to have a treatment group and a control group. You want to have something to compare your treatment to, so that's called a comparative experiment. It's when a control group is given a placebo and we compare the placebo to the reactions with the treatment group. All right, so why would we use an experiment instead of an observational study? This is very important because we want to use an experiment in order to determine cause and effect. So what does this mean? We want to see if a new drug causes less headaches. Does caffeine cause your pulse rate to go up? We can only do cause and effect with experimental studies. We cannot do them with observational studies. You can only establish cause and effect through experiments. So that is very, very important. So let's take a look at the experiment below and identify the vocabulary that we've talked about. The placebo, the treatment, the control, and what exactly are they comparing? That's important. So Dr. Healthnut and her colleagues gathered 150 obese adults at the Heart Hospital in Raleigh, North Carolina. She wanted to determine whether or not eating a low carbohydrate diet would help to decrease cholesterol levels and help to lose weight. Of the 150 adults she assigned, one group to each eat a low carb diet and the other a standard diet. At the 1 year and 2 year mark, she measured the participants' change in cholesterol levels and weight. So think about your placebo as your control group. In this case, the placebo, there actually is not a placebo because our treatment is our low carb diet. The other was a standard diet. So the standard diet, the reason that that's not a placebo is because it doesn't look exactly the same as a low carb diet. However, the control group is the standard diet. What are they comparing? They're comparing the low carb diet and the standard diet to see what will help increase weight loss and decrease cholesterol level. Okay, so just because we don't have a placebo doesn't mean we don't have a control group. All right, so just be careful with that. So a placebo has to look exactly the same. So here we do have a treatment and a control, but we don't call it a placebo because the diets don't look exactly the same. All right, let's take a look at the next one. So Mrs. Price wants to determine whether or not caffeine affects the pulse rates of students in her classroom. She randomly assigns 15 students to drink caffeinated soda and the other half to drink decaffeinated soda. She puts the two different kinds of soda in the same type of glass. They look exactly the same. The students will not know whether they're drinking caffeinated or non-caffeinated soda. She measures their pulse rate before they drink the soda and then 15 minutes after. So in this case, we actually do have a placebo. It's the non-caffeinated soda because it looks and tastes exactly the same as the treatment. All right, since it's exactly the same. The treatment is the caffeinated soda because that's what we want to see if it affects the pulse rates. The control group is going to be the non-caffeinated soda. They're the control group because they're not getting the treatment. And in this case, it is the same as the placebo. What are they comparing? They're checking to see if caffeine affects the pulse rate. And here, since this is an experiment, we will be able to establish cause and effect. Does caffeine cause the pulse rates of the students to go up in the classroom? All right, so the most important thing between observational studies and experiments is to understand what the difference is. So remember that observational studies are used to collect data, or you're watching the behavior of, say, bears in the winter and summer. You're watching how students act. You're not imposing any treatment. It's something that's already happened. Versus experiments, you're imposing, you're making somebody take a treatment to get a response. So does listening to music hurt your ability to concentrate? You would give somebody to listen to music and somebody not to. Would teenagers return $10 if they're given extra change at the store? You could give them an extra $10 and not give them an extra $10. So what is healthier, a low-fat diet or a low-carb diet? You can impose that treatment on a group.